Okay, so what we were learning yesterday is if you find a promissory note out in the marketplace, there are going to be certain circumstances um, where you can return the promissory note to the creditor. But there are going to be times, let's say if both parties agree that it fell from the lova, that you should not return it to the borrower because maybe there's collusion between the two of them. He says, "Aval im halova model amalva shenachol mimenu lo yachzirenu lo." Sorry, if the creditor admits that it's already been paid, then you should give it back to the borrower. If the borrower admits that it hasn't been paid, then you should not give it back to the lender, because you have to worry about some kind of scheme that is taking place. Because after all, there's something suspicious here. An active promissory note, why would someone just let it fall out of his possession and fall into the marketplace, fall into a public domain? And even if the malva gives a completely valid siman, you should not give it back to him. The only time you would give it back to the malva is if it's a type of promissory note that states explicitly that the creditor does not have a right to collect the debt from encumbered property. Because then you don't have anything to worry about, that there's some kind of scheme going on. And the same thing, if you find a bill of sale, then you can surely give it to the buyer because you don't have to worry about any of that hanky-panky or collusion going on. And then we talked about a ksuva. We said a ksuva has the same din as a shtar chov, has the same din as a promissory note, and therefore you have to worry about if a woman loses her ksuva. That was the thing I was telling you about then. Ksuva de irkisa. Yeah. Irkas is that it was lost. It's Aramaic, because you would say ksuva de ne'evda. Yeah. The Choshen bo lepiron and you have the same issues. And let's see how far we got in the Imrei Yaakov. Okay, so I don't think we've done any of the, I think we only did the first Imrei Yaakov. Okay, let's just read the parentheses. Aval shtar shemitchayiv bo lozun ulahalbish beno v'kalosa obito v'chasano meshach kama shanim ein choshishin bo lefi ra'on. But let's say it's a promissory note, but it's not a promissory note that's a ksuva. It's it's a tanoim document. Because what does the tanoim document say? The current tanoim document that we use is really meaningless. It doesn't have any really significant or specific information at all. But the tanoim document that used to be done, let's say at the engagement, you know that there are some communities that still do that. Most communities don't, but some communities still do. They draw up the tanoim document when the couple gets engaged. And contained in that document are actual guarantees of what each father is going to guarantee as far as financial support to the couple. So, it could be that it's written in the document that the father of the chassan is going to support the couple while the son is learning in Kollel. He's going to support the couple for 3 years or 5 years, whatever the terms are, and he's going to buy a new wardrobe annually for his daughter-in-law. O bito v'chasano, or if it's the father of the bride, which is actually more prevalent, that for whatever reason in certain communities, it's become the expectation that the girl's family is going to provide support for the son-in-law who wants to learn in Kollel. And Um, okay. Let's not be. Yeah. Okay. Ein choshen bo lefi ra'on. So if that type of document, if that promissory note gets found in the marketplace, so then you don't have to worry about that there's some kind of collusion here. Sheyifra b'mos b'shana zu ba'ad mizonos shel shana haba. He says because it's dated that he's going to pay on an annual basis. He's committing himself to pay on an annual basis. So you don't have to worry that the next year is going to be in some way. In other words, this document can't be abused, so to speak, because it says that he's paying for it on an annual basis. So let's say you find it in the middle of the year, you find it in June. So or you find it in whatever. You have to assume that he laid out the money for the current year, and it's good to be used for the next year. You don't have to worry that he paid in advance for next year's supply, and therefore to say I'm not giving it back to the Choshen and Kala. So l'chein yachzirenu lahem v'lo lo, and therefore give it back to the Choshen and Kala. Don't give it back to the father-in-law. Im yesh bo kinyan shein bo chashash hamlacha, provided that it is recorded that a kinyan was made in the shtar. If there was no record of a kinyan made in the shtar, it doesn't say the word vikanina, that we made a kinyan over this, then you should not give it back, because there's a real concern that maybe this was not taken seriously, and maybe the father-in-law changed his mind. Yeah, he changed his mind after he saw that his son was on the cell phone most of the day and not learn.
Where let's say with a photocopy, right, you sign a contract and then it says
Sure.
if you don't, after 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is, if you don't let us know much in advance, this contract
automatically renews.
Forget about it, you forget about it.
Sure, happens to all of us.
Yeah,
it's like even more so now than ever. You got Amazon and you've got
so a lot bound by the contract is bound by, like, is there some forgiveness here about you're just not remembering it?
Well, I don't know that we've seen anything in our texts that has addressed that exact situation, that a contract automatically renews on an annual basis. But essentially what you're committing to when you sign the contract for the copier is that it is an automatic renewal every single year. So it would seem that when you commit yourself to that contract, unless you notify them 3 months in advance, you've made that commitment. I don't know what reason there would be for a person to say, well, I just forgot. Saying I forgot is not an excuse, usually in the law, neither in secular law nor in Jewish law. If you just because you forget doesn't mean you exempt yourself from your contractual commitments. Is there any type of exemption for I forgot? Yeah, if it's the fine print, right? What I
some laws against this as well.
Well, I don't know about that. What I do, I have a Sirius XM, and the radio. Okay, so in my car. So if I negotiate with them every single year, my contract is $99 for the year. It's a pretty good deal, in my opinion. But if I don't negotiate with them, it automatically renews at their regular rate of $270 something, whatever. Right. So I put in my calendar, in my phone calendar, and in my desktop calendar, that right before the contract is about to renew, contact Sirius XM. And I do the same thing with another vendor that I deal with for my life insurance or whatever it is, So you basically, today, there's really no excuse. I forgot, because there's so many ways to remind yourself, to set reminders for yourself. Yeah.
Sign it. But sometimes they're not annual reviews. Sometimes you have like again, I guess, buyer beware.
Yeah.
So I
But
don't know what this maybe to look it up more. But Marvis, yes, or we believe knows where to look it up. Just says if the contract is for more than 60 days, automatic renewal is allowed only on an open-ended basis. For example, if a subscription is for 1 year period, automatic renewal for an additional 1 year period upon expiry is prohibited. Yeah.
You have to be a consumer.
Right.
yeah, I mean, there might be laws to protect the person from that. Like, yeah,
And now the credit cards also offer you a protection. That they send you a message. This contract is they're renewing. It seems that this is a renewal. Do you want to accept it or not? So they also try to protect your credit cards.
uh-huh.
Like Visa, they send you a message. You want to pay for this or no?
Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at um, the Imrei Yaakov. Okay. So no same bo siman mufak, even if the creditor gives a clear and distinct siman, he shows the sign that he recognizes the star, and it's really his. You still don't give it back to him. V'hatam sharei nishtabi at hamalva v'yadu amakir hasimin v'efshar shenachol miyad alova v'kvar parua. And the reason is you still have to fear collusion and some kind of scheme, because even if the malva recognizes the promissory note, it's because he had held on to it for quite some time before the borrower paid it back. You still have to fear that maybe the borrower paid it back and the lender gave it to the borrower, and then they created a scheme and they said, here, why don't we create a situation where you'll just accidentally lose it, someone will find it, they'll give it back to me, and you and I will collect from encumbered property and we'll split it. Okay. Okay, shtar she'ein goven bo meha mishubadim. But if you have a promissory note that says that the debt can only be collected from unencumbered property, so then you would give it back to the malva because there's no fear of a scheme. Dahainu she'ein bo edim. El shahalova kosaf b'ksav yado afilu chasmo bo b'ksav yado. He says, what's an example of a promissory note that cannot collect from encumbered property? If it's an IOU, which was merely signed by the debtor, but there's no witnesses. Oh, afilu chasmu bo edem, or another example would be, even if witnesses did sign it, ach chasimasam lo ba'a rak lekayim chasimaso shel bal hashtar, avo lo chasmu al gufa inyan. But the witness is signed to testify that this is the signature of the debtor, but they did not witness the transactional loan. Okay, de'eno gova mimishabdi. In both of those situations, an IOU is valid, but it can only be, like, in other words, if a guy writes you stam an IOU saying, I, John Smith, owe you $100, you can take that to the Beis Din and collect from John Smith, but you cannot collect from his encumbered property because there's no witnesses on the transaction. Even if there are witnesses, but the witnesses are just signing that we verify that this is John Smith's signature, but they're not verifying that the loan took place, that also can only collect from unencumbered property. A third example is if the witnesses witness the loan, but it says explicitly in the contract that the creditor cannot collect from encumbered property. Now, why a person would lend money under those conditions, there could be any number of scenarios that you could create for yourself. It clearly puts the lender at a disadvantage when he commits himself to a loan and then says, but I cannot collect from encumbered property. Right, it's an unsecured loan. Right, but there might be reasons why you do that. Could be it's your son-in-law, and you lend him the money, and you basically, your son-in-law says, look, I need to preserve my credit. I don't want people not to buy real estate from me. So would you mind signing off on the fact that it's an unsecured loan? And that way, no one's going to be fearful of buying stuff from me. Okay. Kidlael divrei masel shem. We learned this before. Az im halova mode yachzir. So then, in all of those scenarios, if both the borrower and the lender agree that the loan has not been paid, then you can give the note back to the lender. V'chein im yesh lelova b'nei chorin shemaspikin l'shibud hachov im halova mode yachzir. But here's a fourth scenario. What if it's a promissory note that entitles the creditor to collect from encumbered property, but the debtor has sufficient real estate and holdings to latch onto at the present time, such that the creditor would not need to touch property that's already been sold at the present time. In other words, we look at the assets of the debtor, and let's say he sold off one of his real estate holdings since the loan was made, but he still has ample real estate holdings such that even if we give it back to the creditor right now, he would not be able to latch onto the encumbered property because there's sufficient unencumbered property. So in that situation, you could also give it back to the lender, which now expands the whole scenario. So that even if you find a promissory note that does entitle the creditor to collect from encumbered, it is a secured loan, you can still give it back to the lender, provided that you've ascertained that the debtor has ample unencumbered real estate, okay, or unencumbered property. Well, you can look at people's, you can check, guy's living in his house, right? Is the house encumbered? You can ask him, show me your financials. What's how much is owing on the house? What's the house currently worth? And is it the house yours free and clear? Yeah, so fine. So yes, he sold off his cottage, right? So you can't collect from that, but you can kick him out of his house and collect from his house, right? There's always a way to be able to verify this. So now, like this whole halacha has changed based on what he's just revealed to us. So in most situations, it turns out, you could and you should return a lost promissory note to the creditor. Under most circumstances, you would return a promissory note to a creditor, provided that the debtor has ample unencumbered property. In most situations, a debtor has sufficient holdings, whether it's real estate or chattel or whatever it is. He has sufficient holdings that will cover the amount that's written in a promissory note. I mean, unless it's like $1 million and the guy is renting a house, right? So once the debtor acknowledges, I still owe on this debt, then you can for sure give it back to the creditor. Yeah. Okay. You first have to establish that the debt is still good, right? And the way you establish that is you ask both parties. And as long as they both admit, yeah, then under most circumstances, you would give it back to the creditor. But you should still keep in mind in the back of your head that there's this halacha. Let me just verify that there's no possibility for collusion here. Okay. B'shtar chov sheyesh bo kinyan. If it is a promissory note that has a kinyan recorded, because we said b'chol ze b'shtar chov sheyesh bo kinyan came in shachshash mishum piron. Aval shtar mechiru matana sheyesh bo kinyan keven shein bo lo chashash piron v'lo chashash hamlacha Yachzirenu lahalokeach. He says, but if you find the bill of sale where a transaction is recorded in the bill of sale that says that on such and such a date, Reuven sold goods to Shimon, right? And Shimon now claims, when you tell him that you found this bill of sale, that yes, I need that back because I haven't collected the widgets that I purchased from Reuven yet, and this is my evidence that I still have to collect them. So then you do give it back to Shimon, and so that he has the power of collection. He says there's no fear of collusion in that situation. Even when the seller doesn't agree that the bill of sale fell from the buyer. Okay, and the reason is because what's his argument? It says that a kinyan was made. They made a transaction, so we don't accept any argument that he made. Well, I know I says that I made a transaction, but I asked him to give it back to me. He says, no, come on. In that kind of situation, that's not plausible. We did have a halacha previously that there are times when a transaction is recorded in a shtar, but if we know for a fact that it came from the seller, then it could be that the seller had said, we'll make a kinyan now, but I'm still waiting for certain conditions to be met before I give you the bill of sale, right? That's possible. But if you find it in the street, you don't have to worry about that. He says, Da'af shemiyad nishtabdu al yedei zeh nechasav lamalva, v'leka bo chshash mukdam k'del sif yud zayin ayin sham, mikol makam areach chshashu mishum piron shemispat al yedei zeh hashtar. He says, in a situation where it's a promissory note, even if a transaction is recorded in the note, you still have to worry about collusion. But when it comes to mechiru matana sheyesh bo kinyan, when it comes to bills of sale and bills of gift, where a transaction is recorded, because in those situations, even when we know that Shimon has not collected his goods yet, the gam hamocher anosein mochen atalitein lo, and when the seller is protesting and saying, "Don't give him the bill of sale," afilu hachi yachzer, you still give the bill of sale to the buyer. The havalei ki'ilu baliyado, because it's as if we know for a fact that it already has come to his hands. The chol zeh laman damer delomrina and edav b'chasuma of zachin lo, avol laman desvir le edav b'chasuma zachin lo, gam imein bo kinyan elastam shtar matana machzirin lo, v'ayin masher kasafti le'el. He says, remember, we had this machlokes whether a kinyan needs to be recorded in a shtar to finalize a bill of sale. According to one opinion, even the witnesses just signing the shtar constitutes itself a kinyan without you having to make a separate kinyan. As soon as the witnesses sign and the shtar is given into the hands of the buyer, that de facto, according to some poskim, constitutes the kinyan and does not require a separate kinyan. We, as a matter of course, always record in a promissory note and in a transaction, we always try to record that the transaction was effected. But there is an opinion that states that just the witnesses signing on a bill of sale is itself sufficient to sort of be the mechanism of kinyan. Okay. That's when the witness is signed, that itself is a mechanism of kinyan, according to one opinion. Okay, so you don't have to actually say vikanina, that we did a separate transaction and do the handkerchief. But it's a machlokes whether that's true or not. Okay, uchesuva dina kishtar chov, and a ksuva is a promissory note. So if you find a ksuva on the street, do not give it back to the woman until you verify that there's no collusion taking place. He says, therefore, if you find a ksuva in the street, don't give it back to the wife. Say, I'm sorry, madam, but even when the husband says, give it to her, you have to say, no, well, I'm worried that maybe the ksuva was already collected, or perhaps the ksuva was forgiven, okay? And then the husband divested himself of all of his assets. V'harei who wrote Salasus Kenyino ala Lukuchos, and he wants to do some kind of scheme to be able to get back his sold properties. Ach ein mashakasafti le'el, lefize yimein b'ksuva sikum atzum ela keragil sheish lebal nechasim b'nei chorin shemaspikim latashlim aksuva yachzel isha b'haskamas abal. But based on what I just wrote a couple of paragraphs ago, that in most situations the husband has sufficient unencumbered property to cover the amount of the ksuva, and a ksuva today is not more than about 30,000 Canadian. So most men have unencumbered holdings worth 30,000 or more. So then you would give it back to the wife, according to what we wrote. In most situations, you would give it back to the wife. Okay, so we'll hold it here for today. It's Hashem will continue.